Well, welcome everybody. We've got a fairly big session planned for you tonight. But first of all, a big thank you to Sally Williams for moderating tonight, but also putting in the hours to prepare and get our presenters in a position where they can share their knowledge tonight. So again, big shout out and thank you to Sally for that. Okay, we've got three presenters lined up tonight. Dr. Christian Kenfield will be talking on the medical side of it. Darren Eager will be looking at wellbeing, and then the journey home will be with Annette Hasselman. But first of all, from the medical side of it, Christian Kenfield will be talking on the things to look out for. Christian started his medical career in the Army and has had first-hand experience out in the field where he's honed his surgical skills. He's now based in Melbourne with a practice, but he's also part of the Australian Medical Assistance Team, which is also known as AUSMAT, and you'd hear that on the news. This is an official government multidisciplinary healthcare team that gets deployed in response to national or international disasters. I know for a fact that Christian's been thrown on to Lear jets and sent to third world countries to perform operations that have been life-saving. So I'm looking forward to hearing tonight. And so with that, Christian, if you could take control, and we'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Grant, and good evening, everyone. I'm very honoured to be talking to you all and am in awe of what you're all just about to do. Unfortunately, I'm still at work in an operating list. I've got the team on hold at the moment whilst we have this discussion. I'm in a working office at the moment, so I'm just going to, people are going to be coming in and out potentially. I'm just going to take myself off camera, but we'll start the presentation. Now, myself, together with the medical team, want to fill you with the confidence that you are going into this exciting race with good medical gear and equipment, good instruction, and a good and experienced medical team, which is going to support you through any episode of injury or illness. And you are aware that we are available at the end of the sat phone. It's really important that you know this. It is so important to do the very basic health and hygiene things well, which can potentially avoid a cascade of little problems that could lead to a fall causing a fracture or something similar that could actually derail your Melbourne to Osaka campaign. It is an endurance event, and it's one that relies so heavily on your colleague. I'd like to start by talking about the importance of adequate hydration because it is basic, but it is actually so important. It is important to use your own bottle to help keep track of the volumes consumed each day and to reduce the chance of sharing an illness. You may be more prone to constipation anyway during the race with a different diet and reduced daily step count. And it's important to keep an eye on your bowel habit, which sounds funny, but out there it is important. To start stool softeners early. In Melbourne even, people regularly call an ambulance because the pain from constipation can actually be so bad. And of note, emergency departments and urologists see a spike in kidney stones about 5 to 6 weeks after a heat wave, and problems from dehydration can be very real. Even low levels of dehydration can increase the perceived effort of doing work and reduce your performance. Please do not purposely drink less to avoid needing to go to the toilet, especially when in wet weather gear and/or when it is rough. This can actually be a good strategy for short races, and I think many of us actually do it, but it can cause problems on longer trips, and these problems can actually be quite severe. Losing a little bit more fluid can actually objectively interfere with your judgment, your concentration, and your decision making, all of which are very important for you guys as a team. It can be really difficult to control your fluid losses, especially when you're unwell. And so it is so important to keep your fluids up. When you're feeling sick, this can be hard, I know. Like a baby or a child, when they are unwell, you just need to get something into them, even if it's just an icy pole for the child. The best treatment for so many of these basic things is actually prevention. And it sounds like a catchphrase, but it really is so important with many of them. Make sure you carry sufficient electrolyte replacement in the form of drinks and or powders. You can also make your own quite simply using the World Health Organization formula, which is a litre of water, half a teaspoon of salt, and 5 or 6 teaspoons of sugar. And what this does is it enables you to absorb more of the water from your stomach when you are unwell or when you're behind in your fluids. Intravenous and subcutaneous fluids are given to patients in hospitals. And I don't think there's anyone out there who wants to get so bad that they need rectal fluids. It is probably easiest to underestimate fluid losses on cold and windy days when you're working hard under your wet weather gear. If you're thirsty, then you're already on the way to becoming dehydrated. And if you feel hungry, sometimes it's actually thirst and your brain's tricking you. Think gin and not whiskey in regards to the color of your urine. But most people need about 2.5 to 3 liters a day and increase this markedly, maybe even double as you're going through the tropics or if you are working hard. Apathy, inability to focus, cold sweats, anorexia, excess salivation, yawning, belching, headache, pale complexion, and finally nausea and vomiting. And the vomiting can be severe. Victims may also feel a sense of impending doom. We've all seen this in others and potentially even felt it ourselves at some stage during our sailing careers. Seasickness is a sensory conflict between the eyes and the brain and the vestibular or balance apparatus in the middle ear. It's a disconnection between the body's perception of motion and the actual motion itself. It can be made worse by dehydration, anxiety, being cold, tiredness, an empty stomach, which can actually seem counterintuitive, but that's why many people will recommend some water and some bland crackers just to have something in your stomach because it has scientifically been shown to be better for seasickness than having an empty stomach. Seasickness can be improved by staring intently at the horizon, not just looking at the horizon, but really focusing on it through keeping attention on a task. And that's why helming can be good. And unfortunately, sometimes only through acclimatization. And the poor Navy cadets who are thrown onto the ships often will vomit for quite a few days before they eventually get the seasickness under control. Seasickness can contribute to developing hypothermia, so keep warm, keep the layered clothing up, and look out for these symptoms developing not only in yourself, but of course also for your crewmate. Now, there are many available treatments, and none of them have been shown to be better for all people. It'd be nice to say, well, no, actually, what's the best possible one? There is no best possible one for all people. And it really is a matter of trial and error. And it's really important that you know which works for you before the trip. Even if you feel that you haven't been seasick in the past and you don't need to take these tablets, it's important to experience the side effects of these tablets because some people report the side effects as actually being as debilitating as the seasickness itself. Of note, some or many of them actually contain lactose, and if you are lactose intolerant, then you may need to take some lactase tablets as well so that you don't get diarrhea and it becomes another issue on the boat. We generally recommend starting 24 to 48 hours before departure or before the onset of bad weather and to continue for 1 or 2 days afterwards. And it's important to remember that any oral medication vomited within 20 minutes has not been absorbed. Some of the popular treatments are scopolamine patches. Really important that you wash your hands thoroughly afterwards because touching your eyes after touching the patch can dilate your pupil on one side and give you quite bad visual problems. Now, this is a slide that no one wants to see, and I'm told that it is actually much more uncomfortable than it looks. This is gunnel bum or folliculitis, and it's from sitting in / wearing wet clothes for long periods of time. The folliculitis can turn into this if it doesn't respond to antibiotics, and when there is an abscess like this, it needs to be surgically drained because even intravenous antibiotics don't help. This is actually a patient from the weekend who was on intravenous antibiotics for 3 days and it just continued to get worse. So this is a real life case. Please remember this case because it really is horrible when thinking that it's too much effort to get into dry, clean clothes, which is so easy to do when you're exhausted. This is a timely reminder actually to discuss the little things that can make such a big difference because they can become debilitating and we don't think about them in our day-to-day life when we're on land. Hand washing / alcohol hand rub after using the toilet, before preparing food, and before eating meals. Keeping as dry as possible, removing damp clothes when off watch, changing undergarments and socks regularly, sanitary wipes as needed. Some use nappy rash or barrier creams on the longer races to try and stop that gunnel bum. Especially with the great or big toe, not cutting your nails off at corners for risk of getting ingrown toenails, and shaving armpit / groin hair and potentially getting an abscess, which will need to be drained, especially near the equator where the temperature is going to be high and the humidity level is going to be high. Really important that you don't do anything that's potentially going to give you one of these abscesses. Now, when looking through all of the reports of illness and injury on extended journeys, it's these simple things that we've covered so far that represent the greatest number of medical problems, especially if they deteriorate. Nutrition, try meals repeatedly well before departure. There is a risk of palate fatigue and getting sick of eating the same things. Aim for balanced meals, protein, carbohydrate, healthy fats. And of course, remember snacks and supplements and treats. You'll probably lose lean muscle on this trip, but we want to try to limit it as much as possible.
Christian,
Yes.
Can you advance the slides, please?
Sorry, which slide have you got there? A cut on the hand?
We've just moved off the gentleman's bottom.
You should now have, sorry about this. Do you have a cut on a hand?
Yes, we do, Christian.
Yes.
We do now, thanks.
Thank you. Let's move on to some of the fun stuff. How to stop bleeding. It's really important to kind of be as careful as you can on the boat, but accidents do happen. And when there is bleeding, there are a number of different ways of stopping this bleeding. Direct pressure is the best way of stopping external bleeding. Use gloves, apply very firm pressure to the point from where the blood is coming from with a finger or two. It's what we call point pressure. Don't grab a towel and try and put the pressure over because the blood will actually just get absorbed into the towel and not be stopped. You need 1 or 2 fingers. And to continue this for as long as possible until the bleeding stops. And it's usually going to be in the order of 10 to 15 minutes. Elevation. Elevating the part of the body, usually an arm or a leg, will reduce the bleeding from the veins and from the skin. Unlikely to be effective if the bleeding is coming from an artery. Immobilization, keeping the casualties still in their bunk, gives any clot that forms the best chance of staying in place, sealing up that bleeding point. Splinting fractures, putting the broken ends of the bone back as close as possible to normal position, and we'll go through all of this in our practical session, essentially pulling the limb out to length, splinting firmly but not too tight in that position. If there's a fractured pelvis, holding the pelvis together with a strap around the pelvis. And suturing, putting the wound edges back together, and hopefully this is the bit that you guys are going to have the most fun with when we use the pigskin in our practice session, putting the wound edges back together, stitching or stapling them in place stands a good chance of stopping this bleeding. I've put tourniquet down the very bottom, and it's down the bottom for a reason. It's to be used only in extreme circumstances. It will dangerously reduce / eliminate blood flow to the end of that arm or leg. It is incredibly painful if applied properly, and realistically, the limb below that tourniquet will be lost. So if you're having a swim and a shark takes off the lower part of your leg, tourniquet goes on, but anything below that will of course be lost. Skin wounds are common on boats. If deep and gaping, the edges should be brought together. This aids healing, leaving a neat scar, and stops or reduces the risk of infection and other complications. Especially around the tropics, many of these wounds shouldn't be closed. And if there are wounds as you're crossing the equator, then we will get photos sent to the medical team and we'll advise on what should be done. But essentially, if the wound edges can't be brought together, then we don't try to close them. If it's been open for a long time, then we don't try to close them. In the tropics, there is a very high risk of gas gangrene if the wounds are tried to be closed. There are a number of different ways of closing wounds. The top left corner shows the adhesive wound strips, or steri strips as we call them. These are easy to apply. They are intended for small incisions, let's say less than 5 centimeters long, and they're ideal for shin wounds where you don't want to use stitches. They're not good in the damp or over joints. The skin stapler in the middle is a little bit more difficult to use properly, but again, we'll get you very comfortable with this during the practical session. It is quick. They're very good for wounds on the trunk, especially on the scalp if you get hit by the boom. The arms and the legs, not affected by the damp, and do not use on the face or on the neck. Top right corner picture shows the tissue adhesive, or Dermabond as we call it, which is essentially just expensive super glue. It's moderately difficult to apply, is for small incisions, less than 5 or 8 centimeters in length, and on cuts with clean edges. It is not good in the damp or over joints. Really, really, really important you don't get this in the eye. And then sutures. They're the most difficult to place well. They're most useful for large wounds, ragged edges, over joints, or where there's persistent bleeding. And we'll practice all of these as well as injecting local anesthetic, which is needed for all of them except for the steri strips, when we meet up at the start of February. I expect the most common burn by far will be sunburn. And this sounds very basic, but just to go over it quickly, apply sunscreen 20 minutes prior to exposure to the sun. If using mosquito or insect repellent as well, to put on after the sunscreen. Remembering to use chapstick to the lips, as often looking up at the sails and the cap will not protect you from that. And shade and shelter options are essential on the boat. Sunburn and dehydration can lead to hyperthermia, so a high body temperature, which can lead to sunstroke. Now, sunstroke is a body temperature of 40 instead of a body temperature of 37, and that's where you can actually start melting your brain. So it's incredibly important to avoid sunstroke. Many people say that they've got sunstroke. They don't really. It's not that common. Other burns from food, drink, especially hot water, coffees, teas from the galley, and there's a picture of a fire in the galley, and hopefully not, but potentially from flares. Immediate action is needed. Remove the patient from the heat, put the fire out. Going through the airway, breathing, circulation that you learn in your first aid kit, and essentially 15 to 20 minutes of clean running water. Burns are incredibly painful. If there are areas of the burn in the middle that are not painful, then that's actually a really bad sign, and it means that that full thickness of the skin, the superficial layer, which is the epidermis, and the underlying dermis, has been completely burnt. Instead of being shiny, it's often dull in color, and it's a little bit like dead leather. And it means that those little nerves have been burnt. For extensive burns, and we'll go through this with the practical session, from a flame or from an explosion, Glad Wrap is an excellent first layer to cover the burnt skin. Now, what do we need from you? Any chronic medical conditions, things that you've just been putting up with, like hemorrhoids, you have time to get them treated now so that they won't become an issue. Any chest pain on exertion, nosebleeds, difficulty starting or maintaining a urine stream. I know that there can be a fear of going and seeing a doctor in case they find out something that's bad, but essentially anything that is identified in the next little while by going to see a doctor can be treated so that you're then good to race. It's actually a requirement that in the 6 months prior to the start of the race, that each competitor is medically signed off by a GP and by a dentist. This is a new requirement to minimise your own risk, as well as risk to your teammate, to your boat, and even to the search and rescue crews who might be called in to rescue you. There are no need for immunisations or for malaria prophylaxis for the race, but for many of you who will be island hopping on the return, both are advisable, and we can talk about that. There is a measles epidemic at the moment in Southeast Asia, and it's strongly recommended for anyone going through the area that you check to see that you've got the booster. I don't know the exact age, and I will find out for you, but the majority of people under, or everyone under, I think 55, has had 2 doses of their measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and I'm just not sure what age that goes up to, but we will find out. If you've had 2, you're immune. Medical kits. The medical kits are going to be extended medical kits. You are going to be carrying drugs of dependence in terms of painkillers that we are not allowed to have in our car. We're not supposed to be having in our house unless they've been prescribed to you. It is illegal for a GP to prescribe medications like this for the boat. And so there is a protocol of lawful supply of Schedule 4 and 8 poisons to racing yachts in Victoria, and we have a number of pharmacies available. Again, we'll go through all of this in early February when we meet in person to ensure that you have these drugs that you hopefully will not need, but have in the event of an emergency, that they are secured properly, that they're declared when they need to be, and that will all be okay. As well as the medical kit, it's important to have a simplified day medical kit, and this will preserve the expensive items in the medical kit for major incidents only. When you open a medical kit, things go everywhere, potentially getting wet, and we don't want to ruin them for if there is an emergency. Pain relief, band-aids, bandages, seasickness medication, cortisone cream, after sun cream, that type of thing. And hopefully that will be the only medical kit that you actually have to open. Medical kit details will be disseminated over the coming months, and as well as the extra drugs, such as the 3 antibiotics that we have chosen in consultation with the infectious disease specialist in Melbourne. In regards to medical incident, on board, stabilise the casualty, call the duty race officer, transfer contact details, especially the sat phone that you will be using for the boat. I know that for the Sydney to Hobart recently, I was speaking to the Chief Medical Officer during the week, and they were trying to get in touch with one of the boats on their sat phone, and they were not using the boat sat phone, they were using the person's personal sat phone, which made it very difficult for them. So transferring contact details, which we will already have, and patient observations, recording of and administration of medication and observations. So pulse, not blood pressure, but respiratory rate, how the patient's going. And then the management team will kick in by filling out medical incident forms that are required, notifying the duty medical race officer who will advise of management, and it can go from there. Helicopter transfers won't be discussed tonight, but we will discuss them when we meet in early February. And I'm going to see if we can even get a helicopter pilot to come and talk to us about that, because there are a few different things that need to be done. Confidential crew medical questionnaires. This is a fairly standard thing to be completed by all competitors prior to departure. The information is going to be reviewed only by the duty medical officers and will be kept confidential and only used in the event of an incident. However, I do strongly recommend that you discuss any medical issues that you have, any allergies that you have, regular medications that you are having with your teammate, so that they're aware in the event of something going wrong. And this is especially so if someone has diabetes, asthma, and of course, epilepsy or anything more serious. Just briefly, this is something that none of us want to think about, but you have heard the term cardiac arrest and also heart attack. And for those who are not medically trained, a cardiac arrest occurs when the heart unexpectedly stops pumping blood throughout the body, which is typically caused by a disorganized heartbeat or something like ventricular fibrillation, as opposed to a heart attack where there's a blockage in the artery that supplies the muscle of the heart, which on a yacht, not much can be done, but with the cardiac arrest, because of the electrical abnormalities, something can be done with an AED or an automated external defibrillator. Now, this is something that each crew should talk about. In years to come, it will hopefully be seen as a waste of $1,500, but may be your one chance of survival. And I'm thinking more for crewmen out there who have potentially had a small heart attack in the past, who already have a slightly abnormal heart rate with atrial fibrillation or something similar. And so it's something that we will talk about again in the practical session. They range, most of them, from about 1,500 to 2,000, although in my research for this presentation, I saw one on eBay and I think it was about $78. Probably don't buy that one. And again, hopefully this will be seen as a bit of a waste of time. Sorry, a waste of money, not a waste of time. Now, I've got a picture of CPR right in the very middle, and it's tiny. And the reason it's tiny is because the chance of one person being able to do CPR for more than a couple of minutes effectively is very, very low. One of my mobile intensive care ambulance friends went to a arrest last week, and there were two of them doing CPR, taking it in turns every second minute. And after 6 minutes, both of them had to go home at the end of it because they were so exhausted having done it properly. If you are hundreds of miles offshore, the chance of being able to do CPR effectively is zero. And so the only CPR we'd recommend is if you are using one of these AEDs, there is a shock. They recommend CPR for 1 minute prior to potentially a second shock, then that's what we'd recommend. It sounds a little bit morbid, and I don't mean for it to be, but just want to bring it up as an issue and as an option of getting one of these AEDs. And I think that with all of the money that is being spent on these campaigns, in the grand scheme of things, it is a small amount. Now, please type your questions if you have any into the message system. We'll unmute. And if you have any questions that you can think about after tonight, then I'm very happy for myself and for the team to answer them. And we will get back to you if you can email them through. All of the forms will be available on the Melbourne-Osaka Cup website under Race Docs Medical. And a quick plug for the offshore first aid seminar, which is going to be Monday, the 3rd of February. It's going to be in person. It's actually going to be really fun because it's going to be hands-on, and we'll have multiple stations set up where you will rotate from station to station and get comfortable doing the things that we are wanting you to do, which will hopefully only be done in this classroom, and you won't need to do it on the yacht. But if you need to, you'll feel comfortable to do so. Thank you,
Okay.
guys.
We've just got a couple of questions. Christian, thanks for your
Yes, there's no one in the
presentations.
office at the moment, so
Okay, so a question about the defibrillator.
yes.
Do you need to connect a cable to a battery, or is it an independent unit? I think is what Grant is aiming
Yeah,
at.
no, these things are amazing now. They're the size of a large iPad, let's say, or even a little bit smaller than that, and they are completely self-contained with very large 1, 2, 3 stepwise what needs to be done, and it's all completely automated, as the name suggests, and has enough for multiple shocks if needed.
Great. And any recommendations for vitamin tablets or supplements for those with water makers aboard?
Yes, it was something that I was actually thinking about this afternoon, but I'd already given my talk in. There are a range of different yachts doing this. Some are going to be stripped down race yachts. Some are going to be very comfortable, and you could probably charge an admission fee for people to go on them. And I think the food will probably reflect that. And so I think if you are going in very lean, it's important to take a vitamin tablet and a generic vitamin, a men's health, a women's health, they're all the same vitamins. So when people get a vitamin for their liver health and one for their gut health, they're all essentially the same tablets.
Okay, and a question about pain relief in the medical kits, whether
Yes.
green whistles will be
Yeah, the pen train
offered.
whistles or the green whistles. I actually take one backcountry skiing with me. I'm not supposed to have it, but you guys will supposed to have them. You will have them. We'll teach you how to use them. They're incredibly effective. So they're actually not painkillers. They don't take the pain away. There are what are called a dissociative, and so essentially you go, oh, I've got a broken leg, but I don't really care. Do what you want with it, and it gives you enough pain relief so that that can be splintered out in place, and you are very comfortable afterwards. And then, of course, we'll have a ladder-wise progression of stronger and stronger painkillers. It's important to note that when you're on something like endone or pralidone, which is one of the class 8 drugs, so drug of dependence, that you shouldn't be operating heavy machinery, driving a car, doing anything important. So you probably can't be helming, you'll be out of action, but probably what's caused you to need to have the endone will mean that you won't be helming anyway.
Great. And any quick tips for people who may experience dizziness and fainting in hot climates, cooling vests, towels, etc.?
Towels in water. So cooling vests often rely on being put in a fridge or something similar. There are some that don't, but you're going to have access to a huge amount of water, and even salt water in a towel, draped over your back, draped over your shoulders, will make things a lot better. I know it may seem as though I labored on about the hydration a lot, but it is so incredibly important in preventing dizziness, in preventing constipation, preventing seasickness. All of the things essentially stem out of being dehydrated or avoiding the dehydration. And, again, we do not want someone knocking their head because they were dizzy because they weren't drinking enough water.
Great. We've just had a bit of feedback from one of the entrants about the vitamin tablet issue and water makers. And his suggestion is that there are remineralization cartridges that you can install in water makers. So it's something for people to consider.
Yes.
Okay, Grant.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Christian, for that presentation. And I think we're all looking forward to getting our hands on doing a little bit of suturing and also some of the dental side of it as well. I found that very fascinating in the last time we did the Melbourne-Osaka.
Having said that, everyone's teeth are going to be in tip-top position after having been seen by the dentist in the last 6 months. So that won't be as big an issue.
Excellent. Thanks, Christian.
I better go and do some suturing myself. Talk soon.
Excellent. Well, our next presenter is Darren Eager. Darren has been the psychologist for a number of the Melbourne-Osaka yacht races. I've heard this race being described as our Everest. And one of the most important things is that by the time you get to the other end, you're still friends with your co-skipper. It's a big ask. Not every crew can manage that. But when you enter the doldrums, your boat gets to 32 to 34 degrees, which is the water temperature. With very little wind, you're going to find yourself absolutely exhausted because you're going to be doing a number of sail changes as the thunderstorms come through. And when fatigue sets in, your social fascia is pulled down, and your co-skipper is going to see straight through into your soul. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Darren to give us some more information on how we can get to the other end in the good shape. And if you could take control there, Darren. Well, yes. And Darren, have we got voice for you?
Yes, how's that?
Got you now, thank you. Yeah, go on.
Okay, I'm still recovering, Grant, from some of those pictures that Christian showed us. I will never sit around in wet pants ever again, I tell you.
Me either. But with that,
they look nasty. Okay. Look, thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. I wanted to just, I guess, share with you a little bit about not the medical aspect of preparing for this particular race, but the psychological aspect. And it's a bit that, as Grant said, I've been supporting this race on it for a number of campaigns now. And I've noticed a few patterns. I've learned a few things myself about how people go about their preparation. And so tonight I wanted to just share some of that information with you and make a few suggestions you may want to consider as part of your general preparation for the race. Pitfalls. One of the number one pitfalls that I've encountered is that people have a tendency to be boat people. We love our boats. We love sailing our boats, tinkering with our boats. But we're also, when you're coming up to an event such as this one, it's too easy to become too focused on your boat preparation. And I hear these kind of things all the time. Like we've got plenty of time to get to know each other once we get underway, or I've known them for years. What else is there to know? Or I'm too busy getting the boat to the line. We'll sort that stuff out later, along the way. The other thing that I've encountered is crew lineups changing. Now, in an ideal world, you pick your team, you pick your co-sailor, you get the boat prepared and off you go. Unfortunately, life sometimes gets in the way for varying reasons. So the key there is expect the unexpected, hope that you don't need it, but make sure that you do consider the possibility of a plan B. Level of interpersonal familiarity. Every team that's going to be assembled will have a greater or lesser degree of familiarity with each other. Every team's also got a different backstory. Some of you have perhaps sailed for years and years together. Others may have just come together for this particular event. How familiar or unfamiliar, therefore, teams are with each other, it does vary quite dramatically. There's no rights or wrong ways to form an alliance. It's quite an organic process, but it's important to pay a little bit of attention to what actually brought you together in the first place. Those people who have got a long and close association with each other, they're the ones that sometimes can pop up on my radar a little bit because of that familiarity. That phrase, familiarity breeds contempt. There's a little bit more of a risk of taking some things for granted. That thing, I've known them for an awfully long time, so there's not much more to know. The other one is that sometimes there's a little bit of history there, and quite often we're not the best at sorting our stuff out, and it gets suppressed, and you don't want to be suddenly realizing there's a few undealt with issues as you do get stuck in the doldrums and it's 34 degrees, as Grant said, and things can get a little bit heated in a variety of different fronts. Novel situations, that goes without saying. I mean, we all plan for the best, or hope for the best, and we plan for the worst. Novel situations are often the thing that does trip us up, but we just didn't expect that one. Christian did a great job of talking about the impact that fatigue has on your physiology, but it also has a significant impact on your psychology. So, prevention's the best solution here, but do pay attention to the reality is you're not going to be able to avoid fatigue, but you can limit its impact as much as you possibly can. But just be aware of how that affects your behavior. Balance. One of the things that I see a lot is that people start, as crunch time comes, February onwards, getting boats ready, things don't quite go according to plan. But at the same time, unless this is your sole focus in life, most of you might still be working, you've got family commitments, you've got other things happening in your world. Trying to get some balance both before you leave, how you're going to manage the racing, and worrying or thinking about things that might be happening at home during the race, and then what kinds of things might pop up for you after the race is finished. Understanding that there's trying to achieve some balance throughout the event between your focus on the Melbourne to Osaka as well as the rest of life, the universe, and everything else. And as Grant mentioned, the important post-race debrief. Don't put it off. It is actually one of those little kind of things that I encourage you to think about incorporating into your planning, because maintaining your relationships at the end of the event is a really important thing. You've shared an incredible experience together, and the last thing you want to do is step off the boat and perhaps find that your relationship is a little worse for the wear as a consequence. So plan how you're going to finish that race with a healthy frame of mind. Now, this is the reason for me wanting to get in here nice and early is, as part of a pitfall, is the preparation that I'm talking about, I've seen time and time again not done and not considered until almost the very, very last moment. So I'm really encouraging you all to not skip this part. Do pay some attention to it to make the journey a lot smoother. As I said, we're going to be focusing on race preparations. We're going to be getting the boat and the equipment up to speed. We're going to be getting the logistics right. We're going to be focusing on our boat handling, our training. But what I also want to encourage you to do is develop a crew preparation plan, right? And, I usually ask the question, do you have a crew preparation plan? Usually it's a bit of a scratch on the head and people go, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I'd really encourage you this far out to begin to have this conversation and think about putting one together. And when I talk about a crew preparation plan, I'm wanting you to begin to think about the relationship between each of you, right? Begin to think about the kinds of factors that influence the relationship, things like the kinds of mindset that you have or might need to develop, recognizing the differences between you. Recognizing, for example, that emotional intelligence has an important part to play, and everybody's got a different capacity in that regard. Similarly with insight. So in all, with a real hodgepodge of strengths and vulnerabilities, our confidence levels, our concerns that we might be bringing to the picture, past experiences, and not necessarily of this event, but other events or even other situations that might be a bit of a trigger for you. In the way that Christian was asking people to put together a little bit of a checklist, I'd also encourage you to think about a mental health checklist. Hopefully, most of you have got a lot of insight into your own well-being over the years. Some may be coming into this with a little bit of a history of a few mental health issues. They're all manageable. They're all perfectly able to be dealt with, but it's important not to bury them, and particularly important for your partner in crime on the boat, that they know what they're dealing with. They know how to support you if and when something might pop up that needs a bit of additional attention. Talked about fatigue. We've talked about the interpersonal dynamics. These are just some of the human factors, and there's many, many more. My aim today is not to try and cover everything, but get you to begin to think about some of these things and begin to establish a dialogue with each other about what they mean for you. Of all of the emotions that you are likely to encounter, I want to emphasize one in particular, because I call this one of the core emotions for all of us. And it's one of the ones that I encounter more often in my day-to-day clinical practice, particularly, and that is fear. Now, we're all big, tough, and pretend that nothing worries us terribly much. But if you think about fear not as a positive or a negative emotion, but just one of our emotional repertoire, fear is a very valuable and important emotion because it's one of the key emotions designed to keep you safe. So you never want to eliminate fear. But what you do want to do is understand how you process that particular emotion, how you project that emotion and display that emotion, and also how you respond to that emotion in other people around you. Everyone's different, but understanding how you process this particular emotion is critically important. I just chucked in there, just for a little bit of interest, one of my favorite quotes from author Frank Herbert, who wrote the trilogy, I think, the Dune trilogy, which some of you may have seen on cable TV in recent times. I won't read that out now, but that's something just to reflect on, the notion that it's not something to be got rid of, it's something to actually accept as a fundamental part of who you are, and that it's just part of us, but understanding it is key. So in terms of planning, here's the nuts and bolts. I'm going to set you some homework. What I'd love you to do is to prepare for this event in terms of the psychological and human factors aspect by putting together a little bit of an exercise for both of you. And I want you to do this separately. And what I'd like you to do is think about some of the things I've just very briefly touched on, and write down what are your strengths and your vulnerabilities as you see them. All right. Now, I'm not going to gloss over the fact that this is a lot harder to do than one line on a slide makes it seem. It's actually one of the most difficult things to get anybody to do, is to write down strengths and vulnerabilities. And the most interesting thing is, when I get people to do this, we're really good at actually writing our vulnerabilities, but we all scratch our heads a little bit with our strengths. It's almost an inbuilt humility, I think, that kicks in there, and we find it much harder to write those down. But strengths and vulnerabilities. Think about not only just them from an internal point of view, but also external ones. So things that might trigger you in the external world. They could be, for example, somebody the other day I was talking with was a really, really competent person, except when they encountered an individual that used a particular tone of voice when they when they were quite angry. And it wasn't just anybody who was angry, but there was something about this particular person's tone of voice that triggered them and made them feel really bad, to put it basically. So understanding both internal strengths and vulnerabilities, i.e. things that are going on for you inside your own mind and psyche, but also the things external to you that can act as a bit of a trigger. And once you've done that, think about your teammate and see if you can ask the same questions and generate a list for them based on what you think might be the issues for them, right? And then once you've done that, then the fun part begins, right? And this is the training bit. Take those lists and use them as the beginning of a conversation, right? As the beginning of a discussion. Swap lists. See how good they were at perhaps picking some of your strengths and vulnerabilities. See how well they actually know you. There might be glaring gaps, or you might be absolutely in sync with each other, which is fantastic. But that's the training. That's the kind of thing that I'd love to encourage you to begin to do with each other, to begin to have those conversations. The other thing it does is it's training you to make yourself a little bit vulnerable to another person. Being cramped in a boat, as we all know, for long periods of time is not a natural form of intimacy for most people, and experiencing vulnerability, both not just physically but psychologically, is part of that, of the parcel of keeping you safe. So practice doing it before you head out to sea. Share your visions of how you both see the race unfolding, and look for points of agreement and difference, and accept the fact that if there are differences, you don't necessarily need to iron them out so that you're exactly on the same page. It's okay as long as you're aware of the differences. And it could simply be that those differences allow you to have different perspectives on a situation, which could be incredibly valuable when the time comes. The other things you might want to think about discussing are, run some scenarios. What would we do if X happens? And running scenarios is a really interesting way also of tapping into finding out how your partner is thinking. And it'll give you a much better insight into that mindset that I spoke of a little bit earlier. The other thing that's I've got down there is fun, right? It's very easy to get so focused, so serious about a lot of these things. But at the end of the day, if we should be doing all of this because we enjoy it. It's going to be a mighty fine adventure. Yeah, it's going to be difficult at times and it's going to be incredibly challenging. But if you're not finding ways to make it fun, then you're missing out on a tremendous opportunity to add an extra layer of enjoyment to the whole adventure. Also look for little ways to mark your achievements and milestones. I remember talking with Jessica Watson about all the little things that she and her family did with her boat by placing little things around the boat that she would open at a particular point in her journey to celebrate a milestone or an achievement. Look for fun little ways to mark those points along the way. It gives you something to just to play with. So what I'm asking you to do is plan to have a fantastic time, a magnificent adventure, and one that you can relive for many, many years to come. And part of that preparation will see you accomplish that with great authority and greater confidence. Just finish off with a little bit of a story about, I don't know whether any of you had followed Jesse Martin, not only when he was doing his big solo around the world trip, which was an awesome achievement, but also Jesse's attempts at trying to establish himself post his epic trip. And one of the things that was interesting is that Jesse was clearly a brilliant sailor, incredibly good at managing his physical and psychological well-being on his own around the world. What was interesting when he got back, and his next project, I think it was a couple of years later, was to assemble a crew, including I think it was his brother and a couple of other people, to do a big filming trip. And they got a boat and they fitted it out. And what became evident very, very quickly was that as good as Jesse was as a solo person, he'd underestimated the importance of everything I've been talking about so far this evening in preparing himself to actually inhabit the boat with other people and how that was going to impact his psyche. And unfortunately, that particular journey unfolded very, very rapidly. Unraveled very, very rapidly, which is a crying shame. Finishing off, reaching out for support is one of the most challenging things for many, many people. We're going to help you with that. I'm going to certainly be available all throughout the preparatory phase of this coming event. And I'd really encourage you to reach out either to people that you already have in your network that you're comfortable talking to with about some of these kinds of things, but also feel free, drop me a line. My contact details will be there at the very end. I'm more than happy to answer some questions or point you in the right direction. But the key thing is reach out early, and there's always going to be some support available. In terms of support before departure, if you reach out to the medical team and me in particular, confidentiality. All discussions that you hold, for example, with me are held in the strictest of confidence. This will be explained in much greater detail when you make contact or when we do have a conversation. But just be very mindful that it's a confidential conversation. I can provide some assistance with the planning and the preparation in line with what I've already talked about this evening. We can do that either as an individual or we can do that as a team. I would strongly encourage you, for example, to take up an open invitation to all competitors that the planning phase that I was just talking about earlier. I'll be more than happy to be a little bit a part of that and support your efforts along that path. And review that plan, even if you don't do that planning with me, but if you want to reach out and speak with me about the review that you undertook and any issues that might have popped up as a consequence of that. Ask questions, address your concerns early. Please, as I said, one of the pitfalls was people leaving this side of their preparation to the very end. And I had people ringing me or talking to me a week out and desperately trying to work on relationships. And it, quite frankly, was a little bit too little too late by that stage. Lastly, I'm also mindful that not everybody has English as their first language. So for those of you who might not be native English speakers and the language might be a bit more of an issue for you, still reach out and we'll find a way around that and we'll get your needs met. During the race, I won't touch on that too much, but just know that contact, as Christian said, to the medical team will also potentially include some contact with me through the race if that is required. Again, good preparation usually ensures that that's not an issue. However, things have cropped up in past races, and just know that there is support available to you should that occur. Lastly, post-race support. Now, the kind of post-race support that I would love to provide is be there at the end and have a nice cold beer with you. And I'm working on seeing if that's still possible. But realistically, those debriefs, critically important. Do arrange to just get away from the maddening crowd and just do a little bit of a debrief. Make sure that any issues that might have cropped up during the event, you smooth those over, and then you can get back to your celebrations. If you need it, though, I am available at the end of the race to help you with that, should that be required. Lastly, I made this point the last time, the last event. One of the lovely things about participating in this event is you're actually joining a very large and growing family of Melbourne to Hobart competitors and family and friends. Everyone who joins this race joins this family, and there's a collective wisdom. There are people around you. Just ask questions. They're more than happy to help you out. You're not alone in your preparation, and certainly during and after the race. Have a fantastic experience, learn, share, and support each other, and most of all, please have fun. And I look forward to seeing how you all go and how I may be able to assist you if required. And with that, I'll leave you with my contact details. Feel free to ask any questions if you like now, or shoot me an email, or there's my phone number. Leave me a message, and I'm more than happy to have a chat.
Darren, while we're waiting to see if anyone's got any questions, just from your recollection, and I'm putting you on the spot here without notice, how many boats did you have to assist on the last race that required counselling at the end of it? Just approximately.
Now you had put me on the spot. Thanks, Grant. There were three.
Three. Yeah, I was aware of two.
Experience. Yeah. There were 3 boats that required some assistance. There were a couple that also required quite a bit of assistance prior to departure. And they're the ones that I said left it a little bit too late. We also had a scenario where there was a crew swap out. And so there was a very hasty trying to meld together 2 new people or 2 people just prior to leaving.
It's a fascinating subject that you're working with, because we look at the physical side of it, and we do a lot of planning preparation in that area, from having a medical kit and everything else on board, and we spend a long time getting that together. But in a race, and particularly the last race, we had one boat pull out. That's a 2018 race. We had one boat pull out because of injury. So that was a classic medical case. But yet we had 3 boats that actually required counselling at the end of it. So the chances of psychological damage from this race, you could argue is probably it's obviously 3 to 4 times higher. So what you provided tonight. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that with us. I can't stress to everybody how important what you've said is, and running through that process. So yes, great. Thank you for that.
So Grant, we don't have any questions, but Darren, we have some excellent comments for your presentation. Well received, and I strongly support Darren's presentation, having been involved with the races previously, and I recommend that you reach out to him in any way he suggested. So thanks, Darren.
Excellent. Thank you, Darren. All right, moving on to our next presenter, Annette Hasselman. Annette did the 2018 race with her husband Jerry on the boat Red Jacket, and then her daughter Sophie joined her with her then boyfriend for the sail back to Australia. Interestingly, in the 2025 Melbourne-Osaka yacht race, Annette and Sophie are teaming up to do the race. So I don't know what's happened to poor Jerry. Maybe he's going to be doing the cruise home. We'll find out, hopefully a little bit later tonight. But also, if you're looking at Sophie's videos, she does have a YouTube channel called Slim and Sophie Sailing Nakama. It's absolutely amazing the work that she's doing with that video. It's very professional, and I'd suggest having a look at it. But now I'm going to hand you over to Annette, and she'll take us through the return journey.
It would help if I unmuted myself. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name's Annette, or Nettie, as some of you may know, and I will say a huge thank you to Darren from the 2018 race, because his support was invaluable. So I also really endorse and encourage everyone to please speak with Darren. It really is important not to leave everything to the last minute and put your head in the sand hoping it's all going to go away when there are crew issues or co-skipper concerns. So we've got to Japan. We're speaking to our co-skippers. We're having a fantastic time, but we actually have to get back. So tonight, my presentation is on getting back to Japan, from Japan back to Australia. So I'm going to have a look at some of those return voyage options, a little bit about provisioning, crew, some of the weather that we're going to encounter on the return trip, some of the stopovers, some of the lessons learned from the last 2018, and that was particularly around permits and visas, and also just a little touch on navigation and cruising guides. I'm going to turn my camera off just so that may make everything work a little bit better. So I'm still here though. I'm going to show you, so daughter Sophie put this video together about 5 years ago for me when I did a presentation on the Osaka. So I'm going to show you this 6-minute video just on our return trip on Red Jacket. I will say that the sail back was equally as rewarding and life-changing, and absolutely an incredible trip back from Japan. So I encourage you all to seriously consider the sail back as well. So I'm just going to play this for you.
It's one thing to get to Osaka, but once you've recovered, you gotta start preparing to go back as typhoon season is creeping upon us. This is Sophie, Annette and Jerry's daughter. I'm just popping by to start you off on the journey home. I've flown to Japan to welcome in my parents and tell them how bloody awesome they are. I've stuck my hand up to help take Red Jacket home, though I don't think I've realised how far home was. It all starts in Osaka Bay. We're dodging ship after ship. And once we're out of the bay, I get a taste of the next 2 months, beating into headwinds. I should mention the crew aboard Red Jacket. Dad has now flown home, and it's Captain, Mum, me, and my ex-boyfriend Jack. Our next stop is Chichishima, 600 or so nautical miles from Osaka. We get beaten up trying to make tracks away from Japan, and once the weather has scrunched us up and thrown us away, we are left with no wind. This is Blue Water Tracks, another competitor. On our way, it happens to be Mum's birthday. Happy birthday! No. We have no wind and we are motoring along our fellow friends. Thank God they're around because they did so much better than me and made Mum a cake. But how did they get the cake to us? Well... Yep, they made a cake, put it in a plastic bag, stabilised it with cans of soft drink and sent it on its merry way downstream.
Oh my god.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Oh
my god. Oh. Thank you. Beautiful. Oh my god. How on earth did you make that?
After 5 nights, the most beautiful mountainous island is sticking out of nowhere to greet us. Chichishima is still a Japanese island and it is so bloody cool. I've got my first taste of what it's like rocking up to a new land, having gotten there on our own steam. We spent our time here climbing mountains before setting off for probably the worst part of our trip. Our plan was to go straight from Chichishima to Micronesia. After 7 days of beating into southeast winds, trying to go southeast, we made no ground. we got hit with squall after squall, and I think that was the closest I came to going insane. From Chichishima, we somehow were pointing now towards the Northern Mariana Islands. Yes, the US military base. We need visas for here, but of course it was not our plan to be here, but we needed to stop. We anchored off Pagan Island and didn't go ashore. Even though still on the boat, that stop, I think, saved us all. Sitting here, putting this together, I honestly don't know how Mum gained momentum to push us out of that marina in Osaka, to do the thousands of miles again, now back to Australia, and knowing exactly what was in front of her, especially now with two young people thinking they were coming along for a leisurely sail. We were now heading for Micronesia, though to different islands to what we originally thought of. We made use of rain squalls and eventually the very low-lying, uninhabited island of Olimareo presented itself in front of us. To get into this atoll, we have to squeeze through the very unmarked small gap between reef. Of course, the squall came over just as we were approaching, but we waited for the wind to pass and we were left with just a soggy arrival. Obviously, we were desperate to go ashore, though upon arrival, we were in complete shock. How could an uninhabited remote atoll be covered in plastic? Plastic rings the island along the shoreline. By this point, we were well and truly on gas rations, so we did a night's worth of cooking on the fire. We are now in the mood for island hopping, so we made the short journey to the neighbouring island of Olato. The island is populated with about 100 or so people. It is still a really traditional, untouched part of the world. In order for us to stay there, Mum put her nursing abilities to work and helped a lot of people with pre-existing health problems and found out that basically all the adult population had high blood pressure. Jack was put onto boat repairs, fiberglassing their banana boat so they would continue to have a way of transportation. We also gave a lot of our coffee and some dry goods we could spare away. The community of Olato were beyond amazing. For people with so little, they gave so much, including turtle burgers. They often sent us home at night with a takeaway meal, normally consisting of breadfruit and turtle burgers. After a couple of days of making new friends, we needed to keep pushing on towards the Solomons, stopping by the doldrums and crossing the equator. Wow. The heat at this point is unbearable. You can't escape the sun unless you're inside, but inside has got to be the most stuffy hot box there is. It is so hot. Ah, Gizo, the Solomon Islands. This is where we provisioned for the first time since Japan. You could probably understand our excitement for fresh food. Here is where Jack flew home and Red Jacket and its remaining crew were reunited with Dad, or Jerry as you might know him. We enjoyed resort life for a moment before pushing out for the last leg of our journey to Townsville. Although I didn't know what was coming for me, wow, boy am I so incredibly grateful. What a journey, and to do it guided by my strong, incredibly capable mother was truly amazing. The journey home from Osaka is just as much a part of the Melbourne to Osaka race.
There you go. That's a little bit of a snippet of our return journey back in 2018, which took us 2 months to sail back. And yeah, I had a very young, naive crew, but the most incredibly capable crew. And it's the most memorable experience that I've had, along with doing the Osaka too. Now, in putting this presentation together, I sought the opinions and past experiences of some of the other 2018 competitors, and I asked Grant from Blue Water Tracks, Tim Ford from Spirit of Down Under. And I also need to give a plug for Tim that he is available for doing return deliveries, skippering if anyone needs a delivery skipper. I also got some experiences from Mark Hipgrave, who was on Mr. Lucky, or this owner skipper of Mr. Lucky. Tristan, who I believe is here and is going to be another 2025 competitor. So at the time, Tristan was returning on Force 11, Rod Smallman on Maverick, and myself on Red Jacket. So just to acknowledge everyone and thank you for your time in replying to my email. So there are some options for the return trip. I just wanted to show you the 2018. Of the 19 yachts that started the race, 16 finished. From what I can sort of work out, 8 sailed back. So with the skipper, one of the previous co-skippers on board and a crew. 4 of the yachts had delivery skippers. 1 actually stayed in Japan. 1 of them went by ship, but not so much a freighter. They owned their own tuna fisheries and got one of their own boats. They put their boat on top of that. And there's one I'm not quite sure about, and that was Chinese Whisper. So if anyone actually knows how they got back, I'm not quite sure. So as mentioned, like our return voyage options, our first option is that we can actually stay in Japan, and that may be something I certainly know that we've thought about retiring and then sailing off to Alaska, but unfortunately that ain't the case. But you can stay, and you do need a closed port permit and what's called I think a Nekozen. And you basically, the boat can stay indefinitely in Japan. The only challenge is that we as human beings cannot, and we have a 180-day visa, but that certainly is an option. So if people are considering leaving it and spending some time cruising in Japan. So option 1. The second option is to ship or to freight the yacht back from Japan. I can't find a lot of information with regards to costs or what services actually go from Japan to Australia. I certainly saw when I was Googling and things, information around shipping from, Australia to the Med or from the US to Australia. So that's certainly something that can be investigated. The other option is that we can get a delivery skipper and crew. And when I asked Rod Smallman for information, and he did get a delivery skipper, he said the highlight for him was actually being in business class and flying home. So he was very pro getting a delivery skipper. And his advice for anyone who's considering this was just to make sure that you have constant 24-hour contact with that delivery skipper, that you have a really clear contract relating to any money, costs, expenses, repairs and things, and to keep receipts. So I'm not sure how well Rod knew the delivery skipper prior, but the options are whether you go for a professional service or whether you ask someone that you know or is trusted to you. So another option. So, oh, I feel like I've just missed an option. Hang on, I'm just going to go back. No, that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the final option is that we can actually sail the boat back. And this was the option for myself. And thankfully I had Sophie and her boyfriend at the time, Jack, volunteer to assist to help me get it back. But it does, if you've already taken a month off or more off to sail to Japan, it's certainly a huge commitment, a time commitment to be able to take the time to get back again. So we took 2 months to sail back to Australia, and we went only as far as Townsville. So at that time, yeah, time is a huge concern, I suppose, for some people. The other thing is crew. Like some people chose that crew would do different legs of the voyage, whereas I had Sophie and Jack on board all the way to the Solomons. But there's challenges in flying in and flying out of port. So just trying to work out where you can meet or people can get off. So there's also really important that people have a skipper's letter. So if they've got a one-way or a one-way flight into a country, there needs to be some evidence that they're not planning on staying there permanently. And the skipper will need to write a letter to say that they're boarding the vessel and clearing out of that country by boat. So the other really important thing is like stopovers, you know, where are we going to stop? And we're certainly going to have a look more at that. Permits, and we'll see in a moment from the lessons learnt from 2018. Basically, most of us, we're also focused on getting the boat ready for the start and just getting to the start line, that none of us, I believe, or particularly what I can say for myself, had not put any thought into the return trip and where we were planning on stopping. And some permits, particularly for the Federated States of Micronesia, it takes months to get that cruising permit. So we almost need to start considering that now. And putting in that application. And the other thing is the weather, and we'll talk a bit more about that too. So lessons learnt from 2018. So the main lesson is definitely around the visas and cruising permits. So Mr. Lucky, they stopped at Saipan for fuel on their way back, and basically they were arrested, handcuffed, taken to the immigration office at the airport, fingerprinted, and had a stamp put in their passport to say that they had tried to enter illegally. So there were threats of the boat being impounded as well, and eventually with some somehow they managed to get a 24-hour opportunity to refuel and get out of Guam. But as Mark said, he's now, he's got a record for the US and now needs to do a paper visa as opposed to the usual online that most of us can do. So a huge lesson from Mr. Lucky. For Tristan as well, he also had issues again around a cruising permit, and this was in Micronesia aboard Force 11. And Tristan tried to clear into the main port of entry in Micronesia, Ponape. And he believed, like from all of his online Googling while he was sailing there, that he could get a cruising permit upon arrival. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And he was put under house arrest and fined $1,000 as well. So there's a silver lining to Tristan's story. And once they were granted 7-day reprieve in Micronesia. And Tristan stumbled across that you could get Bacardi 151 for $23 a litre bottle. So Force 11 was suddenly had a lot more ballast in her on departure from Micronesia. So Spirit of Down Under, they another issue that they had, not so much around permits and things. They had a few tales to tell, but one of them was around damage and repairs to the vessel. They actually lost some of their mast track when they left Osaka. They left in a gale and lost, so they could only raise their mainsail, I think, to the 3rd reef. So I suppose just the remoteness of the return voyage and the ocean that we're sailing on, was quite challenging for them, and they made an unscheduled stop in Guam without any visas again. But what saved them was that Tim had actually made contact with the customs agent, and they were again granted a 7-day visa, and were considered more of a vessel in distress when they entered. So what we've found is that both Spirit of Down Under and Force 11 had further problems where they made unscheduled stopovers without any, and took the risk. And I have on Red Jacket, we also took the risk and we stopped at some of the remote islands of Micronesia. And as you saw in Sophie's video, we stopped at Pagan Island, which is one of the Marianas, without a visa, just because we needed a break. We needed a rest from the relentless southeasterly winds. The other quite a funny tale was in Chichishima. So when we were in Chichishima, there was Spirit of Down Under. Red Jacket was there and Blue Water Tracks. So we all arrived at the same time. And on Spirit of Down Under, Rod, who some of you may know, lost his passport. He couldn't find it anywhere. So they couldn't clear out of Japan. So Rod ended up jumping on the ship back to Tokyo, and I think he had to organise went to the Australian Embassy, had to organise a new passport. Anyway, they met up again. He flew to Guam, where Spirit of Down Under picked him up again. So this photo actually shows that while Spirit was still heading south back to Melbourne, they stopped in Bermagui and it was foul weather. Rod went up to the snow, took his wet weather jacket, and lo and behold, guess what was in the pocket of his wet weather jacket? His passport. So Tim's lesson from that is that basically the skipper or the captain aboard each of the vessels really must, collate all of the crew's formal documents and keep them somewhere safe, so that something like that doesn't happen again. So look, the other really important thing, or just a few other items, was to carry some money. I, for one, left Japan with 10 Australian dollars on us, had absolutely no cash whatsoever. So when we arrived on Elato Island, which was part of Micronesia, the first thing they did was ask us for $30 US, and my meager $10 Australian, they sort of laughed at. So, and we ended up doing community service, and at the time I was a nurse, and Jack was quite handy and a plumber, so we both went to work doing community service. The other thing is, as just mentioned before, many of us risk stopping without permission, and I suddenly chose through Micronesia to stop at the more remote places to undercover of officialdom. So the other really important thing is just to carry as many charts or satellite images like Google Maps and guides as you can, because where you think you may stop may not be where you stop. And as Sophie showed in the video, we had intent to stop at some different islands in Micronesia, and we were pushed a lot further west than we had intended and ended up stopping at completely different islands. So definitely do your research and get as much information as you can prior to leaving Japan, because there's nothing worse than coming into an anchorage or an atoll with very, very limited charts. Thank goodness now, it's incredible. 6 years later, we now have Starlink, and pretty well, we're not trying to download or upload information from an Iridium Go anymore. So hopefully we got access to a lot more information now. The other really important thing that we had informal radio skeds on the HF for that return trip, which were incredibly invaluable. I think we checked in, I can't remember if it was once or twice a day, and with the boat, there were probably about 6 or 7 of us sailing back around the same time. And just that support, if there were yachts in front of us, they could pass on information to the yachts behind that were going to stop at similar places. It was a real safety net and a lot of moral support and a little bit of humour at the end. When we got to hear about Tristan and his incredible Bacardi find in Micronesia. We still had our trackers were on board, so family and friends and the ORCV were certainly monitoring where we all were. And I suppose that sort of brings into question the role of the ORCV, because, the race is finished and it really is our responsibility as skippers for the sail back. And I very much welcome anyone official from the ORCV to perhaps talk a little more about that. They certainly were keeping an eye on us, but it was our responsibility, and we had that safety net of other yachts sailing back. We had that support of others sailing back together. So look, some of the highlights of the sail back, look, there's a multitude of different places you can stop. I'm focusing on sailing back to the east coast of Australia. Tristan also, he did sailing down the east coast, I believe on his own boat, Force 11, but he also delivered one of the Western Australia yachts back to Western Australia, which he did less stopovers and sailed via Palau and Asia to Australia. But I'm going to focus more just on the heading towards the east coast of Australia. So some of the highlights from all of the competitors or past competitors I asked. So Chichishima, which is a Japanese island, and Tim mentioned that a 7-day stay is an absolute must because it's just so much on offer there. The Marianas, which includes Guam and Saipan, and I'll show you Morg Island, which Spirit of Down Under went into as well, which is this incredible crater. The Federated States of Micronesia, there's over 600 islands there. So, you can take your pick and you'll suddenly see them as you're sailing through them on your way to Japan. So it's absolutely lovely to stop over. And we all had very, very different experiences in Micronesia, depending on where we all stopped. Spirit of Down Under stopped in one of the Papua New Guinean islands on New Island, and they stopped at Kavieng. And they found that was really helpful for provisioning. Nissen Island was another stopover for many of the yachts as well. And as Tristan said, it was plenty of coconuts for that newfound rum that he had on board. So, and I know that Blue Water also stopped at Nissen as well. And a lot of us also stopped at the Solomon Islands, which was a little bit off the beaten track and certainly made us do a lot more close hauled sailing than we really wanted to do. But it was well worth the stopover as well. So there's the Louisiades as well. So if you had more time, and then, probably that would be the final stop before heading back to the Australian mainland. So the first part I just wanted to focus a little bit on from Osaka to Chichishima, and you'll see, hang on, I'll just get my pointer. I can't say this, sorry, these ones here. And Chichishima is one of these Japanese islands. So it's approximately about 600 nautical miles southeast of Osaka. So it is a port of entry and to clear out of from Japan. You can access fuel and gas there. There's a dive shop that suddenly, though we had to, just with jerry cans, we got fuel. There's suddenly no fuel dock. There was a small supermarket there, so you can re-provision to some extent, but it's very, it was really just topping up what we'd already done in Osaka. It's a beautiful, beautiful tourist island. It's almost, I want to say it's like World Heritage or Marine National Park. It's got coral reefs, there's turtles, there's whales, there's beautiful hikes and things to do on that island. It's absolutely stunning, and a beautiful population of Japanese people. So a very, very special spot to stop. So certainly put that one on your itinerary, Chichishima. Just a few other photos of our stay there. This wonderful bar where all of the crazy cacophonous crew went to one evening. So from Spirit, Blue Water and Red Jacket. Okay, so once we've departed Chichishima, really the next stop along is the chain of islands called the Mariana Islands. These are US territory. There are ports of entry, and predominantly that would either be Saipan or Guam. But we definitely do need an ESTA. So Australia is exempt from part of the visa waiver program. But the ESTA is an electronic system for travel authorization, and it's really important that we organise one of those before we depart Japan, which I, for one, I think I had tried, but we hadn't received anything. So So basically, we suddenly stopped at Pagan Island, which is one of these ones here, and just anchored for 2 days just to have a rest. But we were too scared to get off the boat. It's a military area, and you'll certainly see some interesting activity. Like we saw submarines, I think we saw drones. There's a lot of military activity happening around there. So now, Spirit of Down Under, they stopped at Morgue Island, or they didn't actually stay, but Tim wrote that he did a circumnavigation of the crater in about an hour and said he did that in both 2013 and 2018, and absolutely it was spectacular. So Morgue Island, you'll see on this map is one. Sorry, I haven't got my glasses on. It's one of these top ones here. This is just some photos of Pagan Island where we just did a pit stop for a few, it was about 48 hours just to have a rest. So following that, the next stop, you'll find that you'll sort of tend to go between Saipan and Guam and then head further south into the Federated States of Micronesia. Now, these are, as I was mentioning before, around 600 inhabited and non-inhabited islands. And it's since the late 1970s, it's an independent, or if I can say, country. And each island, it's quite diverse, from being subsistence living to, some of the main islands being more developed. So we do need a vessel entry application, and all of us finally thought of that whilst we were in Osaka, but it really was too late, and none of us had received that permit prior to departure. So there are 4 ports of entry on the main islands of, I'm not even going to say those, but and as I mentioned, Red Jacket was a bit sly, and we went further to some of the western islands and tried to keep under the cover of darkness from the officials, which was not a good thing. So, but we had an amazing experience. But I won't advocate for doing that. So, but as I mentioned, between Blue Water Tracks and Red Jacket and Force 11, we all had very, very different experiences. The islands we stopped at were Olimareo and Elato Island, and there was probably only around 100 people living on Elato, and they had, there was one solar panel. It was incredible, like subsistence living. They were eating turtles, but such generous, beautiful people, and they really touched our hearts and gave us lots of bananas. So just a few more photos from Micronesia. As mentioned, we didn't stop here, but Spirit of Down Under stopped in Kavieng, and it is on the top, just up here, the sort of northwestern tip of New Ireland. For those that sort of sailing the conventional route, like usually you'll come down here and into the Solomon Sea. So Tim mentioned that it was a fantastic spot for provisioning, and they were given a driver and a ute to go off shopping, and really loved it. So the harbour's protected in westerlies and easterlies, but it's very open to northerlies and southerlies. So just to be mindful of that. A lot of information in the sailing directions regarding Kavieng. So for us, our next stop from the Micronesia, Blue Water Tracks and Force 11 stopped at Nissen Island, which is a Papua New Guinean island just to the north of the Bougainville Island. But we continued, and Blue Water Tracks too, we continued on to the Solomon Islands, and we entered at Gizo. But Gizo is very much the stereotypical bureaucracy. We're sitting at a desk with a man with a rubber stamp who only operates Monday to Friday, so weekends you can't clear in. So there's an anchorage on Leopari Island, and the only chart I had was this, and I was lucky that the mothership Blue Water Tracks was actually anchored here, and they helped to sort of guide red jacket in as well, because of course we came in a horrendous squall. But Leopari, which I've just shown, sorry, here, this is Leopari, and Gizo, like we sailed this way and entered to clear into Gizo. So if you're arriving there on a weekend, you can suddenly stop at Leopari, and there's a small resort, and it's sort of like a bit of a cruiser's haven there. So look, that's just a taste of some of the places you can stop. Yeah, so they would be the main chains, like the Mariana Islands and the Federated States of Micronesia. So now weather systems, you'll suddenly feel the pressure once you're in Japan, that we don't have a lot of time to linger about unless you are planning on staying, but you know, for indefinitely. So we were there for about 2.5 weeks before we left, and most of the yachts sort of left. Some left a week after the presentation, and others left a little later. But there is the risk of the typhoon season is beginning, and we need to be very mindful of that for our sail back. So we'll find that when we, you know, Japan, it's a bit like Victoria, it's in the variables, and you know, sort of quite at 34, 35 degrees north. So some of the prevailing winds are southwest in June in departing Osaka, and there's suddenly some frontal systems going past. So but as you've moved further south, rather than the northeast trades, what you're going to find at that time of year is that you've got more east to southeasterly winds in the northwest Pacific at that time. So the typhoon season can be as early as May. And I just got this information here from, I can't even remember what this is called. I'm sure you all know it's an American sort of weather climate. And what you'll see here, these are all the significant tropical cyclones that started in May until December. So you can see that there certainly is a risk, and they define a tropical cyclone as greater than 34 knots. So we can expect, like for any given year, that there's going to be 20 to 24 tropical cyclones, and for any year the Northwest Pacific averages 13 typhoons. And if you are sailing back through Asia, like that incidence increases significantly. So certainly something to be mindful of and keep a close eye on. For us, Jerry was at home and was sort of giving me satellite, like whilst I had predict wind on board the boat, but Jerry was sort of monitoring and letting me know of any systems that were developing whilst we were sailing back too. Now, crew, it's really, really important. We've just heard from Darren for the trip to Japan. It's probably just as important for the return trip. We tend to be a bit more relaxed about that trip home, but it is still a very, very long way home. It's incredibly remote. You know, if something goes wrong, you really, there's not a lot of help out there. So it is important to consider the delivery crew home. I was incredibly fortunate to have Sophie and Jack on board, and yeah, I trusted them 100% from the first night leaving Osaka Bay. They were just incredible. But you want a crew that are capable of keeping watches, reefing, because there's so many squalls, particularly as you get towards the equator. So you're shaking reefs out and in, you know, every half an hour. And you want a crew that are more than happy to wake you if they are at all in doubt that they're going to wake you. And so, you know, Soph woke me at 5 o'clock one morning when we had a submarine bearing down on us and we're getting yelled at over the VHF radio. So, yeah, so it is a long way. It's really, really hot at times. And you want them to be self-contained. So there's plenty of time for reading, or, you know, for some sort of entertainment on board, and you just want them to be relaxed and get the most out of it. So yeah, so please do consider your crew for the return trip as well as your trip to Japan. Now, provisioning, it's certainly not quite as easy to re-provision the boat in Japan. When we were in Osaka, like one of the members of Hoko took us to the local Costco, which is great. You know, it's huge and you can buy, you know, 50 reels of toilet paper if you need it, but just the language is really hard. So I suppose this is my example is, you know, you're looking at a product and you really have no idea if it's fly spray, oven cleaner, deodorant. So it can be quite challenging. And we also found fresh food was quite challenging and to get enough of for our return trip in Japan too. So, and, you know, we have different dietary, cultural dietary, what do you say? Oh, golly, I've gone blank. Just, you know, what we eat and what the Japanese eat are two different things. So it can be, you know, it can be a little challenging to re-provision the boat. I don't know if it's possible because, you know, coming through quarantine and things into Japan, whether we can. Yes, thank you, Darren. Holding, yeah, Google Translate was very valuable in Japan. Whether we can put provisions, you know, non-perishable stuff in the container for the trip to Japan, I'm not really sure, but it may be worth us considering that, or whether that's an option, or whether we're not allowed to import any food from Australia into Japan. But it is a little tricky. The next thing I just wanted to talk about quickly is around cruising guides, navigation, and just that communication. Here, I just wanted to highlight that because we're sailing in such remote areas, we'll find that depending on what horizontal datum our charts, our electronic charts are using, or just the remoteness in that chart offset, that we may not find that our electronic charts are always telling us exactly the right thing. And I just wanted to highlight this. This is actually coming into an island in Micronesia. This is Red Jacket's track here. And on Expedition, it's actually correct. But you'll see on the Ray Marine, which is Navionics, if I had have, so what I've done, I've come in, I can see breakers everywhere, and I bared away and took some fixes off, there's a little island down here somewhere, and took some fixes and worked out where we were and which actually electronic navigation was telling us the truth. But if I had have relied on this, I would have ended up over the reef and parked up on the reef. So do be very, very careful with your navigation there, and definitely you carry your ENC or paper Admiralty charts for these regions, and do have, you know, I know you can zoom in and create larger scale on your electronic navigation. If you're using paper charts, certainly do have some larger scale for pilotage into and out of some of the better known atolls and ports of entry. So yeah, just be very, very mindful of that. What I also found was in the cruising guides, some of the waypoints, the coordinates of waypoints were, again, they must have been using a different datum to what we had. You know, now we're trying to standardize with that WGS 84, but the waypoints were just completely out when I'd plot them into the electronic nav. So yeah, just please use your eyes, because you'll find that perhaps the island isn't quite where it should be. So I've said all of that. The other thing is just the satellite maps. Google Maps is actually, the datum is WGS 84. So that's great just for knowing and for overlaying the charts that you do have. As mentioned before, this is all I had to come into Leopari. There is a cruising guide that you can download from the internet for Micronesia. Of course, I couldn't find it when I was looking for this presentation, but there is a cruising guide, or I found one, but it was from 1995. Yeah, so the other really important thing is around communication. So definitely we're all going to have satellite phones. And in the 6 years since the last race, we've got Starlink now. That's certainly going to keep us almost in contact 24 hours a day. And as I mentioned before, the HF was absolutely invaluable 6 years ago. And for those that do have HF, I hope that it will also will be able to do those skeds for the trip back again. So the key points really, it's just as rewarding sailing back from Japan. We get to stop at all those islands we went racing past. It's culturally diverse, absolutely stunning places to stop. It's a challenging sail with prevailing headwinds. It is hot. It is really hot. You know, down below, it's probably getting to the mid 40s plus. You're crossing over through the doldrums and across the equator. It's really important to plan early for return options, crew preferences, getting all of those cruising permits and visas and ESTAs and everything in place before even leaving Australia. So that's absolutely critical. And that's where most of us came unstuck last time. Certainly provisioning is a lot more challenging in Japan. So just to be mindful of that. And yeah, there are little stores along the way, you know, if you're stopping at Chichishima, but they're certainly very, very, very basic. Carry plenty of spares, tools, gas. We nearly ran out of gas on our way back, so we were on severe gas rations. You know, fuel and water, because there's very limited places to stop to refuel and get those things. And you know, if we've got to make repairs along the way, we're making unscheduled stopovers and may put us at risk. That's me. Are there any questions?
So Annette, we had a question that I think you've probably covered. That was how long did people stay in Japan before sailing back? But I think you gave them an idea of if they were returning, they need to be mindful of the typhoon season and the weather frame, of getting out of those waters. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, look, for us, it was about 2.5 weeks that we were there. For Grant, it was what, a week and a half for you, Grant? Was it?
Yeah, it was pretty short.
Yeah. And you know, you're quite tight. You're tired from the race. You know, we were finding we were dozing off every time we were in a bus or a train. We'd start dozing off. So you're still recovering from the trip to Japan. So yeah, you're sort of leaving feeling or quite. Yeah, you haven't 100% recovered, and you're on a high from being in such an incredible country as Japan as well. So, yeah.
And then what would you say about the on the trip home? You know, with the winds slightly different compared to going to Japan? Did you find them more on the nose, where on the way up it might have been more on the tail? Is it how would you describe that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Northwest Pacific was definitely, I suppose we had more broad reaching on the way to Japan. The ITCZ or the had moved as well. It was suddenly like this photo here is us in the doldrums, and we motored for probably 30 hours on the way back to get across. So I think we encountered more headwinds than what we expected on the way back. So we're pretty well close-hauled sailing the whole entire way back to Australia. So yeah.
And are you planning to take more fuel this time to motor down rather than try and sail it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I know on Red Jacket we only had about 120 litres, and I was measuring it every day, just trying to ration it.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting this time what happens. I mean, one of the things I loved most was that HF sked that you talked about. You know, it was really like sitting around the old valve radio at night time, where you'd hear the stories that you guys and what you'd been up to and the other boats, and it was actually the highlight of the day. So yeah, it was a great.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm not sure how many boats have still got HF. It's sort of I feel quite nostalgic for HF radio, because it really was a lifeline, I think, for all of us. And I know for one, we missed one sked because that beach barbecue you saw us have, and we got wrapped over the knuckles because everyone thought we were shipwrecked and castaways on that atoll, but so they were taken seriously, those skeds, but also it was a real lifeline for all of us just to have a nice natter afterwards and marvel in each other's days. So
it'll be interesting to see that if everyone has Starlink on board, whether it goes from a HF to a WhatsApp group, and
true.
And maybe all of us that are back home now will be able to share in that those stories and experiences that you guys are going through.
So true.
And Sophie's planning to do a video series of the race up and back, is hopefully.
Yeah, she is. Yeah. Well, Sophie's around, so she can probably talk to you what she's planning on doing. Is she allowed to open her microphone and say?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Hi guys. Yeah, I'm not too sure what we plan on doing for the way home just yet, but yeah, I definitely plan on filming the whole way there and creating a series for YouTube, as well as I'm wanting to push my boundaries a little bit more and also wanting to create a feature-length film to submit to a festival. So yeah, anyway, that will be our little project as we cruise on up as well.
Fantastic. Lillian's asked a question there. I don't know if you can see that there. Do you want to answer that one there in the chat?
I can't. Hang on. Could you read it to me?
I can help you there. So Lillian is sort of suggesting or asking, if you've done the race before, at what point did you begin to feel human again post-race?
Straight away, really. You never not feel human. I can't describe doing the Osaka. For me, it's just been such a life changer, and I don't think there's a day that goes past when I don't think of this damn race. It's just so it's just, you're on such a high when you return, but there's an anticlimax, so we've all got to come crashing back down to reality at some point. And that's probably the hardest thing, I think, is actually that anticlimax, that returning back to normality. But you've just done this incredible thing that's been life-changing, and you've learnt so much about yourself. So for me, then it was like, oh my God, I've got to do, something else. And so that the end of that year was when I did the Melbourne to Hobart, did the 4+ auto helm Melbourne to Hobart on Red Jacket, because you just want to keep going and reliving and being part of that. Well, for me, just being part of the ORCV and all those special people that have become now lifelong friends, or that Osaka family that we were talking about. So it's an incredible experience. I can't say enough what for me, it's been just absolutely life-changing doing the Osaka race. So yeah. So you'll be on a high for a long time, Lillian.
I bet the Melbourne to Hobart one felt like a little pond crossing, like a Sunday afternoon sail.
Yeah. But it was still special, and that West Coast is so wild. I just love that West Coast of Tassie. So yeah, that's pretty special in itself too. So
yeah, fantastic.
Okay, Grant, we've just got another couple of questions. Annette, what are the best places to fly in and out on the way home? I know in 2013 I flew into Saipan. And that was quite easy. To be picked up by my sister and help her deliver the boat home. And also, is the US dollar the currency of choice in the area or in the region?
Yeah, definitely. So it seems Guam or Saipan are good places where people did do crew changeovers. We had a bit of a crew. Jerry flew into the Solomons, but into Honiara, and then had to get another small plane up to Gizo. So the Solomons was another. Grant, you had a changeover there too? So yeah, so the Solomons, Guam, Saipan, they're probably the only spots really. From Chichishima, there's a ship back to Tokyo, which is what Rod did when he lost his passport. That's all I'm aware of. So yeah,
I think in 2013, I remember someone, Brian Pattinson's return crew, flying out of Truk or Chuk.
Yep, the
Plane to
Micronesia.
take them to a larger island.
Yep,
But I do recall a few of them leaving when we were there.
yep. Just don't forget that you need a letter if it's a one-way trip in and you're going to hop on the boat. So yeah, that's really important.
Okay, so Grant, we had a lovely comment about your birthday cake pertaining to you. And Lillian passed that along. I'm sure you've seen it. There's been some great ideas in the chat, like the Google Translate on your phone for when you're provisioning and around Japan. Maud from Celeste has put up some links for maritime customs around the world. And also a compendium of cruising guides. So keep those in mind, and when we have this session edited and posted on the website, you can always go back and refer to them, or just send an email to me and I can supply that information for you as well. Okay, so thanks, Grant, and thanks, Annette.
No worries. Thank you.
Grant.
Yes, George.
Look, I'd like to give a big welcome to Nita-san, who's joined us for this session. He owns Trekkie. Nita-san speaks very good English, very experienced yachty, very fast yachty, who has done a lot of sailing in this area and has recently done the Palau return race to Japan. And he loves the issue of microplastic sampling, which we're going to hear more about. Annette, I didn't have the same problem with the food in Japan. I was there recently, and you can virtually buy anything you like in Japan at the moment. And as far as visas and helping there, I've developed a very good relationship with both the US government and the Australian government, and they're very much aware of what we're doing, and they're going to be very helpful in our plans going forward. And for those who are not aware, the naval base has been re-established on Manus Island, and it's a joint venture between Australia, US, and New Guinea. So this always was my issue of rescue services in the race, and the gap has now been closed because we've now got halfway between the Marianas and Australia, with a base in Manus.
Excellent. Well, thank you, George. Thanks for that information. What we might do now is we'll wrap up tonight's session and close out the video recording. So on behalf of the Ocean Racing Club and the Melbourne-Osaka Committee, I'd really like to extend a special thank you to Christian Kenfield, looking after the medical and giving you the presentation, Darren Edgar for the psychology and how important that's going to be for the people in the race, and again for Annette Hasselman for her wonderful insights into what to do and what not to do, and to avoid all the traps of the last race. So absolutely a brilliant effort there. And of course, tonight wouldn't have been possible without Sally Williams' help. So again, please put your hands together for all four of them, including Sally, because it would not have happened without them. The next presentation is Wednesday, the 4th of September, and that'll be the Aquis, Border Force, and AMSA will be presenting then. So we'll leave the session open for anybody who wants to have a bit of a general chit chat afterwards, but from the video point of recording, we'll close it and say good night from that. Thank you.